New York. Now, please join me in welcoming Giovanni.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for coming. Have you all seen the exhibition? Enjoyed it? Good start. So, with the 1 hour we have together, I wanted to focus on specific aspects of Andy Warhol's persona, career, and art. To think more carefully about an artist that sometimes gets oversimplified. Andy Warhol is one of many. There's quite a few artists who have been kind of stretched thin by the art historical establishment, and sometimes it's easy to sell them short, you know? It's all about fame, it's all about colors, it's all about repetition, but what does it really mean? Well, Andy Warhol said something very interesting. This quote, "I am a deeply superficial person." See, it's easy to misunderstand that, but look at the paradox, deeply superficial. I love it. Andy Warhol certainly had a thing for surfaces, and we're going to explore that today. This will be our anchor for the talk. But before we begin our journey, I wanted to address a question that repeatedly comes to me when I talk about Andy Warhol, or pop art more in general. So I wanted to start asking, what do artists like Titian, Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael, our Renaissance masters, share with Andy Warhol? It turns out it's quite a few things, but I'm going to focus on 3. One of them is certainly originality. All those Renaissance masters did something unique that nobody else had accomplished before. But there was something else behind their work that sometimes we seem to forget to acknowledge. They all had helpers. And to accomplish their greatness, or let's say that the accomplishment of their greatness was most of the time driven by this. Do you still care about money? A little bit? We like the idea that artists don't care about money. It's a stereotype developed during the 19th century, romantic. Artists will die for their art. Yeah, better not, right? Stay alive, be happy, enjoy your life and work, make money with what you love doing. Not a bad idea. But Andy Warhol always gets accused of caring too much about money. Leonardo cared about money. Michelangelo cared about it. They all cared about being pampered, living in safe environments. Wealth, luxury. Who doesn't like it? That's not all of the picture, of course. So let's begin our journey from originality. And let's think about the originality of Andy Warhol. Where does it lie, and why is that so important to the history of art, so that it makes him this enormous artist? But first of all, the originality of Andy Warhol lies in consumerism, and in one of those places we all secretly love. How many of you love supermarkets? Hands up. Some of you are being want to keep it private, little guilty pleasure. Look at Andy there, shameless, with his cart filled with Brillo and Campbell soups. Look at that smirk. Now, the supermarket was an innovation in the history of American culture, and it didn't just come along with this idea of abundance and comfort. Those of you who love supermarkets and are brave enough to admit it, love that feeling. Whatever has happened through your day, you can just push your cart through the aisles and feel like life can be good. It was new in the 60s. And he came with a new aesthetic regime. Lines and lines of products on the shelf had never been seen before. This is one of the places where Andy Warhol gets his idea of repetition. Not the only one. We'll talk about repetition later. But it's important to remember that it's very original for an artist to find inspiration, not necessarily in literature, history, the past, or novel subjects, but in what they see around them at the supermarket, in popular culture. It takes to be brave, doesn't it? Or fool, whichever. The other originality that's important about Andy Warhol has to do with the medium. How Andy Warhol revolutionized the history of painting and also of photography in one simple gesture. For those of you who are interested in photography, you might remember that when it was invented in 1826, artists became concerned. By 1839, when photography was launched in Paris to great acclaim, and it could capture what is around us, seemingly in an objective way, artists started to worry even more. By the 1870s, when photographs could be hand-colored to look like this, artists seriously worried, wondering what are we going to do with painting now that photography captures reality the way we see it. That's where Impressionism comes up. Impressionism was in part a response to this new invention. Without the invention of photography, painting would have looked different at this time. Have you ever seen this painting? Look on the right-hand side of the canvas and you will see the first photo bombing in the history of painting. You see that man coming through, cropped? Caillebotte loved photography. He had more than one camera, took lots of pictures. That's how he reinvented composition. And photography plays a very important role in the work of Andy Warhol. You all know that the works you see in our exhibition are not classical paintings or paintings in the classical sense. They're screen prints generated from photographs like these that Andy Warhol would process into images like this. How do you do it? Well, screen printing is a very fascinating medium. It was by no means invented by Andy Warhol, but he was among the very first to use it with this confidence and bold glare. Look at this centrality, how beautiful and iconic this image looks. Jasper Jones, Rauschenberg had toyed with these ideas. There were already screen printing artists around, but Andy Warhol had the ability to make screen printing iconic. However, to do so, he had to borrow photographs he had not taken and to process them into screens. In order to do so, you need to send a photographic print to a laboratory that is able to turn the photograph into a screen. The screen is made of fabric, and once it is covered in photographic emulsion and processed through machinery, it turns into a kind of stencil that can be then applied to the canvas and used to create multiples. You can see here Andy Warhol pulling the squeegee through the screen as it is laid over the canvas. Most often, but not always, the black part of Andy Warhol's screen prints comes directly from the screen. But in many occasions, he actually used different colors with the same screen. And it created beautiful effects. It's a complicated technique, but you can have helpers. And sometimes those helpers can take care of the screen printing process even when you're not there. Art historians saw that as very problematic. But it had happened before. Renaissance artists would always ask their helpers to come in and complete parts of the paintings they didn't have time for. So many times Renaissance artists produce parts of the work and left it to the workshop to complete. And at other times we know that assistants would just create entirely new work behind the back of the masters and sell them without their knowledge just to make some money. So Andy Warhol was not unique in that conception. But we can also claim that Andy Warhol needed helpers to accomplish his vision. And that one of the most important things in the creative life of Andy Warhol is the factory. The factory was his studio, but it was also a social reality for many creative people in New York to find a home. It was a place for the so-called misfits of the time. Those who felt rejected by society found a home at the factory. And the fact that it's called a factory, it's provocative and intentionally so. To call your studio a factory. More than one time, Andy Warhol explained that he wanted to make art like a machine. And of course, the screen printing technique, in a sense, allows him to do that. It takes away the nuance of the hand. It takes away that very personal imprint. It generalizes, but at the same time, it still remains Andy Warhol's vision, Andy Warhol's work. He covered the walls of the factory in aluminum foil. He loved silver. You have seen silver at the back of the Elvis Presleys and Marlon Brandos in the exhibition. Silver was the color of the future. Silver was the color of space. Astronaut suits, rockets. It was also the color of the silver screen. So silver was a color of intense potential, the potential of imagination. Now, the factory was an extremely exciting place for Andy Warhol, and it was effectively the beginning of the iconic Andy Warhol we know. You can see him right there on the right-hand side. He's the first artist to create the hybrid artist-rock star. This idea of styling yourself, the leather jacket, the hair, the t-shirts, the jeans. It became his trademark. He worked on his image like nobody else had done before, despite being very self-aware and very shy at the same time. That's one of the interesting paradoxes about Andy Warhol, courting fame and success, but ultimately being so shy and fragile. And money. Now, this is the bigger issue with Andy Warhol that leads many people to claim he was no artist. Like I said earlier, most artists are happy with money. There's no problem with them. I guess how you make your money is the issue. And what Andy Warhol said about money is pretty special. He said, being good in business is the most fascinating kind of art. Making money is art, and working is art, and good business is the best art. I think he's been pretty clear. Is it fair to look at that concept from a negative perspective? After all artists want to work full-time on their art. Nobody wants to have a day job and be an artist in the evening or at the weekend. He wanted a lot of money. He also said that he wanted to be the richest man in the world, knowing everyone on the streets of New York knows he's the richest man in the world. So I guess he also cared about this. Some of his friends at some point claimed that life without fame wasn't worth living for Andy Warhol. Some of his friends disagree with that statement. But we know that his relationship with fame and money stems from his upbringing. Andy Warhol doesn't come from a privileged background. He was born in Pittsburgh in 1928 from immigrants from Czechoslovakia, and his father was a coal miner. What Andy Warhol goes through during the first 15 years of his life was extremely traumatic and complicated. His skin, his health, the poverty, the desire to emerge from all this, the homosexuality, everything makes Andy Warhol's upbringing complicated. But there's a beacon of light, and that beacon of light came in the shape of this. You know, when he was very young, between the age of 7 and 8, Andy Warhol had a serious bout of St. Vitus's dance, which is a condition that debilitated him for almost a year. He spent a lot of time in bed, and it was at that time that his mother started to feed him Campbell soup. Perhaps not the best move when it comes to nourishing a son, but it seemed to have worked out well on Andy Warhol's psyche, because Campbell soup remained one of the most iconic things in his mind. The other thing that his mother brought to him when he was in bed at this time was art materials to keep him entertained. There was only a radio in the house, and when you have to spend time in bed as a child, what are you going to do? So you can claim that his mother, who was creative herself, is one of the originators of Andy Warhol's talent. But the other originator is his brother, who, to keep him entertained, gave him Hollywood magazines. Hollywood magazines with beautiful people. And of course, Shirley Temple was one of them, and it became quickly Andy Warhol's most favorite celebrity. To make his brother happy, Andy's brother asked the studios to send an autograph, and they did. Here it is. Can you imagine when it arrived? Little Andy went ballistic. This became his most prized possession, and it was the first of many autographs he collected over time of Hollywood stars. So, celebrities. He's also the one who said, everyone will be famous for 15 minutes soon. Have you become famous yet? 15 minutes? Has it happened and you haven't noticed? That would be the tragedy. Fame. It's about existentialism, isn't it? It's about giving life meaning. The idea that if others don't care about you, what you say and what you have to express, then is life worth living at all? Well, Andy Warhol used color to express the essence of celebrity. And he also used repetition to express the essence of celebrity. We're going to look at that in a minute, but color is very important when it comes to Andy Warhol's works. We're all familiar with the beautiful Marilyn Monroe's. Look at the stark color contrasting cold and warm, very flat surfaces. Some of the Marilyn Monroe's look abstracted already to a point that make her almost unrecognizable. Art historians have scratched their heads about the meaning of color in Andy Warhol for many years, and there are many different theories on what it really might represent. I've even heard once somebody claim that this is about glamour. I was like, I'm sorry, but glamour is the last thing I see in here. It's almost caricaturish. It's over the top. Look at the color of her skin, the makeup, the lips, the hair. Everything looks fake. And one of the ideas I find more congenial to the color of Andy Warhol is the concept that celebrities are not real people. We could play a game now and pick a celebrity. You can pick any. I'll just pick Beyonce. Unless you are friends with Beyonce and have a dinner with her, you call her up and say, hey babe, can we go to the movies? She's not a real person. We're real people, right? Here, I can see you, you can come here, I can shake your hand. But she's a picture. She's a picture somebody put in our heads. Who put her in our heads? An industry. The music industry. You can buy as much Beyonce as you like. You can buy records, multiple times, DVDs, posters, postcards, underwear, umbrellas, as much Beyonce as you want, but the real person doesn't matter. Not to us. She's a picture in our heads. And that's exactly what Andy Warhol says with these images. Marilyn Monroe is not a real person. In fact, she's dead. And yet she's in our heads, and we've never met her. She's a picture. And as such, she looks very flat, and the colors look very artificial. She's a product that's been sold to us and that we've purchased. And that's where the idea of repetition also begins to play a very important role. Have you ever wondered why Andy Warhol repeats over and over and over something? We already said that part of it comes from the supermarket. You look at the supermarket shelf and you notice all these boxes of cookies lined up, the bottles of shampoos lined up. That was the new aesthetic language of the 1960s. But when it comes to celebrities, his repetition becomes even more interesting. Multiples of Elvis Presley. Multiples of Coca-Cola bottles. They seem the same. Isn't that fascinating? Celebrities like mass-produced objects. You buy them over and over and over. And the quintessential quality related to fame. You are not famous until your face and name has been multiplied. Have you noticed? It's the condition of fame. Otherwise, you're unknown. So the essence of fame is this repetition that becomes an artificial picture, something in our heads. At that point, fame exists. And that's what Andy Warhol celebrates throughout his best body of work, the body of work we all know, love, and admire. But there is so much more about Andy Warhol. These are the works in which you can see the idea of being superficial in a deep way. Returning to that quote we saw at the beginning of the presentation, it's important to think about surfaces and depth in new ways. It's a cliche that good things are deep. We just repeat that. I don't want to depress you. It's only like 1:30 in the afternoon after all, and we haven't had wine yet. Okay. How many people can you say you know deeply? 5 throughout your life? 10? The rest is all made of surfaces, isn't it? You go to work, you say hi to your colleague, she smiles back, turns around and goes, I hate you. You will never know. You won't see her face. Do you care? Are you meant to care? Look at this theater. We don't need to see what's behind the walls to enjoy the lecture. You don't need to know what's my favorite color to enjoy this lecture either. We navigate the world through surfaces every day, and that makes life pretty decent. Otherwise, we'd have to take in so much information to enjoy life. So, is deep good? Or is surface and superficiality the condition of life? And Andy Warhol understood that life reveals itself on surfaces all the time. And that going deep, perhaps, is an illusion. Before I get too deep, I just wanted to think about surfaces in relation to the films of Andy Warhol, because they are usually overlooked and somewhat misunderstood at the same time. How many of you spent a little bit of time in our beautiful cinema to see the short films of Andy Warhol, the screen tests? Did you enjoy them? Did you suffer? They are quite painful. So if you suffered, you probably accomplished this goal. How many of you have had the pleasure to watch Empire? 8 hours and 5 minutes long film in which this is pretty much what happens. It's a long shot of the Empire State Building. And right over here, if you haven't watched that yet, Sleep. 5 hours and 21 minutes of his partner asleep. This is pretty much all you see. He turns around once in a while, sighs. Think about this. You spend your life with a partner, but so many hours every day are lost. Do you look at them when they sleep? What do they reveal as they sleep? What if you did look at them for 6 hours? Does it matter to know in them, to look at them when they sleep? Do you see how he keeps himself to the surface? There is nothing happening, or at least nothing according to our expectation of what film should do. Film should tell a story, film should be exciting, film should entertain us. He basically says, to hell with that. Film is a great opportunity to understand reality. You know when people say the camera never lies? Well, it's true if you don't edit what it is that you have filmed. Once you start editing, oh my Lord, the lies. It's a big lie. The Andy Warhol didn't edit, at least these works. These are durational works designed to test our boundaries, our patience, but also to push us to a place where we want to ask ourselves, what am I not considering about life? They're deeply existential. What am I missing out on because I am not stopping to see something that looks irrelevant, like somebody asleep? He made this concept a little more accessible, and I say only a little bit more accessible, with the screen tests. They're very iconic, they're beautiful, but they're also unnerving. The camera is made to roll right in front of you for 4.5 minutes. You're left alone with the camera 15 feet away from you. No instructions. Andy Warhol didn't say, read me these few lines. It's not a real screen test. It's a screen test designed to capture something about you that words cannot quite describe. These regulars at the factory sat in front of the camera and looked and looked. And if you watch their faces, you can see how at some point doubt filters through. You can see how something changes in their expression. You can see how they go through imperceptible moods. The only one who didn't play the game according to the brief was Dali. His screen test is filmed upside down, and he couldn't resist but perform to the camera. At some point he pulls out a purse and starts rubbing it against his face. It's a very strange thing to do, very Dali-esque. But I guess it also says something about Dali as a personality. The inability to be seen naked, like Duchamp instead allowed himself to be seen naked. On the surface of my face as I say nothing. Because if I say something, then I'm starting to act. It's a very different concept. It's a very different idea. And then darkness. The misconception that Andy Warhol is about fun, the good life. The man was very dark. Do you remember the flowers you saw in the exhibition? The flower series is loved by everybody. It was actually suggested by Leo Castelli to brighten up a little. Can you give me some, light subject? Because everything is so dark. The flowers came in. But what about the electric chair? Iconic symbols of death. Artists have tried and tried through the history of art to paint death in different ways. But how do you paint death? If you're living, you can only get close to the representation of death. And how close did he get to the representation of death when he used these very graphic images of car crashes? He was interested in these images because the people we see dead in these pictures have become famous. I'm sure they would have rather not become famous this way. But that is the 15 minutes of fame. They are on newspapers because of this tragic death. And Andy Warhol becomes even more interested in exploring death with the portraits of Jackie Kennedy. He made multiple works involving her portraits, and these portraits explore surfaces and the inability of surfaces to say something deep. Think about Jackie Kennedy and what she experienced in her life. It's impossible for us to conceive. What about her feelings, her emotions, the idea of losing your husband in the tragic way she did, and to be scrutinized by photographers just before the death, at the funeral, and after. Andy Warhol looks at images of these different moments, posing the question, is this even the same woman we are looking at? Before this tragic event and after. And the more we look at these images, the less we will ever know about what she's thinking, what she was going through. One of the most unique and tragic situations anyone could experience. And tragedy was about to strike for Andy Warhol directly in 1968. This was a major turning point in the artist's life. In a very few moments, everything changed for Andy Warhol. Valerie Solanas was a regular at the factory who apparently sent Andy Warhol a script. Since Andy Warhol was producing films, the factory started to be flooded with scripts he wasn't interested in. And he said to one of his colleagues at the factory that Valerie Solanas must be an undercover cop because the script she gave me is so awful, it can't be for real. Let's say that wasn't quite conveyed literally to Valerie, which is probably a good thing. However, Andy Warhol, not to say no, came up with excuses. Eventually, he said that he couldn't find the script anymore. And you can imagine that at the time, that was a serious matter. It's not like today where you have a PDF sitting on your desktop and you're like, oh, don't worry about it, I'll send it to you again. You lost the script? It was typed. She accused him of wanting to steal it from her and to want to control her life, prevent her from becoming a star, the star that she wanted to become. So, on the 4th of June, 1968, she walks to the factory, she takes the elevator upstairs, and she asks for Andy Warhol. But she's told he's not coming in today. The manager just wanted to keep her at bay. He knew what she was after. She wanted to know about the script again, and Andy didn't want to entertain that idea. She left, but instead of going home, she waited outside. She knew Andy would have come back. Somehow she knew. And Andy did walk in the late afternoon. She greeted him and took the elevator upstairs with him. And it's then that she opened fire. The first 2 shots missed Andy Warhol. He realized that he was in danger and dropped to the ground, playing dead. But Valerie also realized that she was being fooled. She walked right over him and shot a 3rd time. That was a close range shot that, unfortunately for Andy Warhol, almost killed him. He was taken to the hospital where he was almost declared dead. And it was only when one of the doctors recognized him and said, "He is very famous, we need to save him," that they started operating on him. And they ripped him apart and put him back together. And eventually the recovery process started. Andy Warhol talked about that experience, saying that he felt like he died. And that life after that tragic incident seemed like watching TV, not quite the same anymore. This portrait taken by Richard Avedon a year after the incident shows us the extent of the damage that was made by the bullet and by the operations. It took Andy Warhol a long time to get back on track. And when he did, he started to differentiate his brand once more. He launched the magazine called Interview, which is still with us today, one of the most exciting magazines in popular culture. And he also started to think about life and death in a different way. This is where the time capsules come from. You have seen one time capsule at the end of the exhibition. And we all have time capsules somewhere in our lofts or basements. We just don't think about them as works of art. So Andy Warhol also pioneered that idea. Initially, these were boxes made when he moved from one factory location to the next. And when he came to open them up again, he said, no, don't. I want to start afresh. And he continued to put together these boxes with intent, to think about them as conceptual works of art in which objects are layered in order to say something about that specific moment in time in the life of the artist. They're filled with anything, from nail clipping to hair to used condoms, memorabilia of all sorts, promo materials he was sent, vitamins. It's crazy. Or it's genius. 610 at the Warhol Museum. They've all been opened and catalogued because, as you can imagine, they represent an incredible source of information for all interested in Andy Warhol's life and Andy Warhol's art. But death became more and more prominent in Andy Warhol's life. Quite regularly, he would say to friends that he didn't want to set foot in a hospital again, that he would die if he did. And unfortunately, that's exactly how the story ends. Before Andy Warhol dies in 1987, he produces a surprisingly timely series about the Last Supper by Leonardo. He doesn't use the original image by Leonardo da Vinci. He uses a 19th century print that we see here covered in a camouflage pattern. The camouflage pattern had become really interesting to Andy Warhol for different reasons, but most especially because it symbolizes two important things: fighting and hiding. And when you consider these aspects, you can understand that those important aspects of life, fighting and hiding, is what might keep somebody alive. It's what's part of the struggle. It's what's part of the negotiation to stay alive. But in this case, right against the Last Supper, which already introduces an idea of end and closure, that might be an embedded reference to Andy Warhol's homosexuality and his relationship with the church. Some of you, I'm sure, know that Andy Warhol was deeply religious. His mother used to take him to church when he was a child for a total of 6 hours a week sometimes. Saturday evening and then again Sunday morning. And there is something important about this idea that religion played such an important role in his mind, and yet Christianity wouldn't necessarily accept him as a homosexual man. So the fighting and the hiding become extremely meaningful on the Last Supper. So how does Andy Warhol dies? Well, it's an accident. He had to take care of a gallbladder giving him problems and decided to check himself in because he couldn't stand the pain anymore. The operation went well, but in the night, the dripper apparently was set on the wrong flow and drowned him in his sleep internally. So we lost Andy Warhol. That isn't where the very last chapter. If anything, it was the beginning of something else. Right after his death, a major sale of his belongings was organized by Sotheby's, and it was billed as the biggest sale of the decade. Andy Warhol's house in New York was a massive time capsule. He was a collector. He loved thrifting. He loved art. So the house was filled with beautiful art objects, incredible furniture, everyday memorabilia, cookie jars. He collected anything. It was decided that it should all go to auction in order to set up the Andy Warhol Foundation. But some today wonder if it had been better to keep everything as it was, as a Warhol museum. Well, we have some documentation in the catalogs that accompanied the auction, and artist and photographer David Gamble was lucky enough to enter Andy Warhol's house at 66th Street in New York to photograph the belongings of the artist for a promotional shoot dedicated to the auction. This is one of the most iconic photographs taken by David Gamble, perhaps the most controversial and revealing. It's Andy Warhol's bathroom cabinet. Have you ever snooped into somebody's bathroom cabinet when you say, I'm just gonna go and wash my hands? It's a portrait of the artist, the most intimate kind, as seen through the objects he used every day. These are beautiful and also slightly haunting images. Images of a house that was left with the knowledge that you'll be back. A house that wasn't quite prepared for Andy not to return to. And they reveal this spontaneity, they reveal this mishmash of high and low culture that Andy Warhol was so fond of. He collected classical sculptures, he collected Native American art. He collected films on VHS tapes, and they would appear right next to a Coca-Cola bottle icon. Among the pictures taken by David Gamble, one of the most interesting certainly is the kitchen. Andy Warhol had a beautiful dining room that he never used. The house was always so private and kept private deliberately following the incident of 1968. Very few people set foot in the house, and since he didn't host parties, the dining room was not used. He had dinner in the kitchen, you see there, right by the sink. And right above it, and on the side, you can see the Fiesta ware. He collected Fiesta ware sets, as if he had to set up a dinner for half the planet. And that's where the collars come from. The collars that we then find again in his Marilyn Monroe's, or even with Liz Taylor. So you can see why, in a sense, keeping Andy Warhol's house as a museum would have made sense. It would have not just been a curiosity, it would have not just been a fetishization of what the artist touched or used, but it would have actually been a way to better understand where the artist's inspiration came from his daily life, from his desire to collect objects. And again, some of the images in the series suggest his devotion for spirituality. Religious objects attracted him to no end. And this very last image taken by David Gamble, which I think works as a fantastic portrait of the artist. It's extremely iconic with the wig, the glasses, the watch symbolizing the passing of time, the dollar bills on the left. They were the essence of it all. And the touch of kitsch. Because Andy Warhol never was afraid of the kitschiness of popular culture. He embraced it as the legitimate language of art. So look at the Egyptian gods right behind the wig. They're not real Egyptian sculptures, it's Egyptian revival. They symbolize this idea of the mass-produced, the high art and the low art, the eternity of fame, the impossible to understand, and the boundary of death and life. On that note, thank you very much. Thank you. Very kind.